Hey y'all, so I'm going to read chapter 10 of Warrior Priest of Dmon-li, book 3 of the Morcyth Saga. Now, where we left off was James, Jiron, and Miko are heading north. They just left Lyria's island, and they travel north for a ways, and they camp, and that's where we find them right now. They're trying to get back to their friends and family back in Cardri, you know, the ranch. Ranch. It's not the ranch yet, is it? No, it's not. That's in book 4. That's in book 4. Getting ahead of myself. Oh, did I say there's going to be spoilers? Well, if I'm reading it with commentary, there's going to be spoilers. All right, chapter 10. Excuse me. Early the next morning, as they made ready to break camp, a band of horsemen came through a gap in the ridge. Jiron, James exclaimed, pointing. Let's move, Jiron hollered as they grabbed their things and fled westward, hoping to avoid detection. That hope proved short-lived when they heard the blare of a horn. They glanced back and saw the riders moving quickly in their direction. One pointed toward them. Fleeing through the trees, they searched for a place to defend as escape was no longer an option. They came to a steep side of a cliff. Putting their backs against it, they faced the oncoming horsemen. The horn blared again, and the riders came into view through the trees before them. These horsemen weren't part of the Empire's forces. They wore leathers, and most had short, curved bows. Several bowmen had arrows nocked and aimed as they used their knees to steer their steeds. James, Michael cried out, what are you waiting for? The horsemen, though targeting them with bows, didn't feel necessarily evil or dangerous, so he held back and waited to see what they would do. Jiron drew his knives, and Michael brought the crossbow. James put his hand on the crossbow and gently pushed it back down. He stepped forward, held up his hand, and said, "Greetings." Two of the horsemen exchanged looks, and one of them replied, "You are trespassing in Windrider territory." "Our apologies," James said with sincerity. "We did not know that this area belonged to anyone." "None are allowed here," the rider explained. "You must turn around and go back." "James," Miko exclaimed. "Shut up," he said, then turned his attention back to the rider. "There must be some way that we could be allowed to continue." "There is none," the rider asserted. He nodded to the ridge to the north and said, "Had you crossed over, your lives would be forfeit. But you have not yet crossed the sacred boundary, so I will let you live." He paused for a moment and then added, "If you leave now." Suddenly, he felt Jerome's hand on his arm as he whispered, "James, look at their tunics." "What about them?" he whispered back. "The beadwork," he explained. "It's the same as on that necklace Lyria gave you." James looked closer and he slowly nodded as he recognized the same pattern of shapes and colors as was on the necklace. He reached into his pouch for it when the archers drew back their arrows. He stopped and said, "I have something I wish to show you, if I may." Nodding, the rider held up his hand and the archers relaxed somewhat, but still had their bows at the ready. He reached in and pulled out the necklace, holding it out to the rider. The rider gasped and took it from him as several of the others gathered to examine it. The archers lowered their bows a little bit further. After several moments of exchanging words in their language, the rider turned to James. "Where did you get this?" "It was given to us some time ago by a lady." "What lady?" he asked, an odd expression forming on his face. "She called herself Lyria and lived on an island in the middle of a lake," he replied, "the lake at the southern edge of these mountains." His explanation generated more intense discussion among the assembled riders. The bowmen kept their bows ready, but were no longer aiming them at James and the others. When the conversation ended, the rider turned back to them and said, "We will take you to our camp." Then he spoke to the bowmen who slung their bows. The rider turned his attention to James. "My name is Theron, sub-chief of the Windrider Clan." "I am James," he replied. Motioning to his companions, he said, "And this is Jiron and Miko." "We will then be allowed to travel in your territory?" Michael blurted out. "The lady has given you our token," he said. "You will not be immediately turned away, but whether you are allowed to live will be up to our chief." "Live?" James asked. He gestured to the southern ridge and said, "Our camp lies beyond the ridge. If all is as you claim, you have nothing to fear. If not, you'll not live through the day." He spoke to a horseman who quickly rode off toward the southern ridge. "Now, if you will mount behind one of my riders, we will be on our way." It's okay, James assured Jiron, and Miko. I think we'll be all right. As Michael mounted behind the rider, he mumbled, I sure hope so. Once mounted, Theron led them toward the southern ridge. It took over a half hour to reach, and when they crested the top, James heard a gasp from Miko. The valley was filled with tents and horses. Thousands of horses ran free within the valley. This is where the clans gather each year to ready the tribute to the Empire, Theron explained as they rode along. Tribute? Of horses and gold, he explained. How many clans are there? 10. 4 have yet to put in an appearance. The Windrider Clan claims this gathering area as part of our territory, but during this time, all clans are allowed free passage. I take it you don't get along? James asked. Shaking his head, he said, No, not all. Most work together for mutual benefit to make the clans strong. As they continued working their way down the side of the valley toward the gathering, James looked out over the tents, now able to discern the different patterns of the various clans. Each clan had its own unique pattern of color and shapes. The tents, which at first looked to be randomly scattered about, could now be seen as being grouped according to each clan. Near the center of the gathering sat the tents bearing the pattern of the Windrider Clan. It was by far the most numerous grouping of tents in the valley, probably due to the fact that it was their territory. When they reached the edge of the gathering, others took notice of them riding behind the clansmen, and word of their arrival spread. A crowd gathered as they progressed toward the Windrider tents. Theron exchanged words with some as they rode, but most followed along to see what was going on. Upon nearing the Windrider tents, James observed a clansman enter the largest tent, and after a few moments, an aged man exited. Though he had seen a few years, there remained a strength about him and a commanding look. Chief of the Windriders, Theron said, my father. Coming to a halt in front of his father, Theron dismounted and greeted him with a hug. He then spoke in their language. James heard their names being said during the course of the conversation. At one point, Theron held up the token Lyria had given James, and the chief's eyes widened, and several in the crowd began muttering. Theron turned toward them. My father would like to meet the friends of the lake lady. Dismounting, James and the others came forward. Giving him a bow, he said, Greetings, Chief of the Windriders. Miko and Jiron bowed, mimicking James. Greetings, the chief said. Never has a lady given our token to another. This is indeed a strange occurrence, though what to do with you remains unclear. Outsiders are not allowed here, yet you bear the favor of the lady. Theron, he said to his son, see that they have a place to stay. Turning back to James, he said, when the moon is full, the meeting of the clan chiefs will take place. At that time, we shall decide what to do with you. Until then, you may move freely among us. As if that was that, he turned his back upon them and returned within the tent. Now, the riders, to me, they've always been a cross between the Mongols under Genghis Khan and Native Americans. Yeah, kind of like that. He led them from his father's tent and over to Theron returned Lyria's token to James. The meeting will take place tomorrow night, he pointed off to the east and said, the Blacktails have just arrived. By tomorrow night, all clans should be in attendance. He led them from his father's tent and over to a smaller one set up a dozen yards away. Opening a flap, he said, you may stay here while you are among us. Once they entered, he followed them in and closed the flap. What do you think they will do with us? James asked. Shrugging, he said, the laws are clear about outsiders. To be in the valley of the gathering is to die. But yet, you bear the token of the lady, and that is something they must strongly consider. They will not wish to anger the lady. Why? Michael asked. She is beloved by all, he explained. Many have been the times when she has appeared and helped us in times of need. She saved my father's life once when he had been bitten by a snake. We had begun the final rites, but she appeared and ministered to him. I needn't tell you how happy we were when he again walked out of his tent. No, I don't think death will be your fate. What it may be, I dare not guess. I suppose being here for a day wouldn't be that bad, Jiron said as he lay down on a blanket. It may be wise to remain in this tent, he explained. Some of our warriors are brash and easily offended. It wouldn't do for trouble to happen before the chiefs have had a chance to come to a decision. If you should leave your tent, try to stay within the Windrider's camp. They know you are under our protection until the meeting of the chiefs. James said, all right. He lifted the tent flap and left. When the tent flap closed, Jiron said, think they will allow us to leave? Shrugging, James said, I don't know. Thank goodness Lyria had given us that token, or there'd be a war going on right now. There still may be one if they decide against us, Jiron observed Jerome. And the war, of course, that he's referring to is they would have attacked James and he would have fought back, and it would have been bad. There's still a chance. There still may be one if they decide against us, observed Jerome. Let's hope not, Michael said from where he stretched out on another of the blankets. We have at least till tomorrow night before anything will be decided. True, agreed James. From outside the tent, a sudden outcry erupted. James glanced at the others and said, I'm going to see what's happening. The other two got up and joined him as he went outside. The warriors were talking amongst themselves, and they were angered about something. Seeing Theron talking to several warriors who were obviously distraught, he went to him. Theron glanced at him as he approached, and James asked, what's wrong? Pointing to the north, he said, the Grey Wolf clan has just arrived. James looked and saw a large body of horsemen coming over the ridge. Along with them was a herd of horses, most likely part of the tribute. And why is that causing such a problem? That they are here, none, he explained. It's that they brought twice the number of warriors as was agreed upon. And that's bad? It's an insult, Theron replied with anger. To bring so many here within our territory, outrageous. His father exited the tent and looked in anger at the Grey Wolf clan approaching the assembled tents. Warriors of the various clans stopped what they were doing and watched their approach. James glanced at Theron's father and could tell he seethed within. When he looked back at the approaching riders, he saw that there was someone else with them, someone obviously not a clansman. Riding at the head was a man in armor, and chills ran down James's spine when he saw him. A memory came of a storm-tossed sea and a man in armor wielding magic. Is that? Michael began. I think it is, James replied. If it is the one from the boat, how does he know we're here? We have to get out of here, he whispered to James. James shook his head. Theron's father has given us leave to be here. I do not think he would go back on his word for an outsider. Maybe we should return to our tent then, Jiron suggested. We wouldn't want him to see us. Nodding, James said, that might be a good idea. Yearning to know what was going to happen, he reluctantly went back to their tent with the others. As he paused at the entrance, he looked back to Theron and his father. Many of the Windrider warriors had gathered around them as they moved to intercept the Grey Wolf clan. You could tell none were very happy about the situation, and all carried weapons of one sort or another. Then he went into the tent and closed the flap. They sat there, anticipating the sounds of battle erupting around them. But other than raised voices and conversations of warriors going by, nothing happened. They waited anxiously for almost an hour before Theron opened the flap and entered. What happened? James asked. My father was all for driving them out when several of the other clan chiefs warned him about violating the pact of the gathering. Pact? Jiron asked. Yes. It is what keeps the peace during the gathering while the tribute is being assembled, he explained. The highest law of the pact states that no blood shall be shed during this time. Those that do are sentenced to death. Kind of harsh, said Michael. Turning to him, he said, maybe, but it's kept the peace this long. No business on continental grounds, right? What are you planning to do? Endure the insult, he said, seething with pent-up anger. Pent-up deserves a hyphen. But when the gathering is dissolved, then we shall have our retribution. Just then the tent flap opened and several warriors entered bearing food and drink. They placed them on a rug lying in the center of the tent before turning to leave. Once they were gone, Theron said, since I was the one who brought you to the gathering, it has fallen to me to see that you are cared for. Thank you, James said appreciatively. There was another thing I must tell you. The armored man with the Grey Wolf clan? Asked Jiron. A little surprised, he replied, yes. He took his seat around the food, as did the others, and then grabbed a piece of meat. He wants you, and wants you bad, he explained. Why? Asked James. He didn't say, just that he was here for you, and we must give you over. Will you? Michael asked, worried. Shaking his head, he said, no, you bear the token of the lady, and we respect her more than we fear him. Why would you fear him? Jiron asked. You are many, yet he is one. One does not lightly anger a warrior priest of Dmon-li, he explained. They have fell magic and much influence with the Empire. So what's to stop him from just coming here and taking us? Asked James. You are under our protection, he said, and if he broke the pact, then all would fall upon him. We also would no longer send the tribute, for he would have broken the peace the tribute guarantees. He must tread carefully if he does not wish to start a war the Empire can ill afford. I see, James said. Was that why he is with the Grey Wolf Clan? Jiron asked. They have long been the dark ones among us, he replied. The fact that he is here and that they brought so many cannot bode well. They are our sworn enemies, but have allies among the other clans, so we dare not do anything outright against them. What are we to do? James asked. As before, wait for the council. If the council should decide against you, you most likely will be handed over to him instead of killed. They will see that as being one and the same thing. If they find for you, you will be allowed to leave, but when you do, you would no longer be under our protection after you left our territory. After you departed our territory. He would just follow after us and kill us, Jiron asked. Shaking his head, then replied, No, not here, or that would be violating the pact. But once out of the valley and in the plains below, he could. The pact only covers the land within this valley. What can you tell us about these warrior priests? James asked. Not much more than what's been handed down from generation to generation, he explained. Never has one been among us, but they are believed to be great in battle and to wield the magic of their god, Dmon-li. They know no fear, and the power of their god helps them to heal quickly. It's even said to bring them back from the dead. Great, James said as he looked to Jiron and Miko. Michael stared back at him with a worried expression. Then he turned his attention to Theron and said, But he won't do anything until we leave, or the council gives him permission? That is correct. Finishing the last piece of meat, he stood and made to leave. You might wish to remain in here until the council. It would cause fewer problems, he said, and then opened the flap and left. A few moments after he was gone, Jiron said, Maybe we should try and sneak out of here. I doubt if we would make it very far, James said. We'd stick out like a sore thumb if we tried. They'd quickly realize what we were doing and move to stop us. Why is this priest even after us? Michael asked. Theron said they have influence within the Empire, explained James. Perhaps we've irritated them enough for them to bring out their big guns. Yeah. Perhaps we've irritated them enough for them to bring out their big guns. Big guns? Jiron asked. Sorry, James apologized. I mean, what they've thrown at us so far, we've been able to handle. So it would stand to reason that they would send in stronger, more deadly adversaries. 1 second. Those better able to defend against or counter the magic I use. I gotta put some commas in there. I suppose, Michael said. Suddenly, James felt a prickling of magic being used, and he signaled everyone to be quiet. Magic is near, he whispered. They quieted down. They understood what that meant. The warrior priest had to be close. A shadow fell across their tent, one bulky with armor. The prickling sensation increased as the shadow paused at the entrance to their tent. They held their breath. Jiron got his knives ready, and James took out a small rock acquired earlier. The shadow's arm reached for the tent flap, but then several warriors approached, and the shadow drew back its arm and returned the way it had come. They waited for several minutes, and the prickling sensation disappeared before James said, I think he's gone. He almost got in here, Michael exclaimed. But he didn't, James reassured him. So try to relax. Being edgy won't help the situation. The tent flap opened, and Theron walked in. The final clan arrived earlier than expected, and the council will begin later this evening rather than tomorrow. Due primarily to the fact of the warrior priest being among us. They want the situation with him resolved as quickly as possible. He looked directly at James and said, They will wish to see the token and you. The others will need to remain here. Should I go now? Shaking his head, Theron said, No. There will be a banquet, and after that, I will come get you. All right, said James. Try to get some rest if you can, Theron said. Sometimes the councils can go till morning. Was there anything else you require? No, you've been most generous, he replied. Good. He then turned and again lifted the flap as he left. James laid down on a blanket. I should try to get some rest before the council. All right, James, Jiron said. We'll keep watch while you do. He closed his eyes, but sleep was hard to come, and he kept thinking about the warrior priests and how they were going to get out of there. Eventually, though, he did manage to fall asleep. Later, after the sun went down, he woke when their dinner was brought. Feeling much refreshed, he ate with a hearty appetite. They had a fire going in the center of the tent, the smoke escaping through a gap in the roof, through a gap in the top. An hour after they finished eating, Theron entered and said, "It's time for the council." James stood and followed him out of the tent. "Good luck," Michael said before he left. And that ends chapter 10. So Lyria helped him out with a token, otherwise it would have been really bad. Little things keep helping James along the way, you know. I've always liked the Windriders. I've always liked this as part of the story. And keep in mind, I really had no great plan for this book. I was just writing a story, and most of it I was making up as I actually typed it. So like Lyria, boom, right then, and then when the Windriders first there was writers, I didn't know exactly what to do with it, and then I started thinking about, and then all of a sudden the whole clan gathering thing came to mind, and that worked out pretty well. And now the warrior priest, we haven't seen him yet, but from afar, but we know he's after James and he wants him bad. So we'll find out more about tomorrow, chapter 11. I'm gonna try to do one a day at least. Sometimes situations make it where I can't do one a day, but I will make it a point to do it as best I can. And I'm going to work my way all the way through to probably every book I have at some point. Anyway, so a non-related thing. About in August, September, a dozen eggs was about $2. I went to the store yesterday, and it cost me $4.50 for a dozen eggs. I was talking to my friend who lives in Seattle. See, I live in Oklahoma, cow country, and she said that eggs were $10 a dozen. Can you imagine? Oh, I can't even begin to imagine that. No, $8. $8. That's right. She said it was $8 for one dozen eggs. Crazy, absolutely crazy. Anyway, I only said that here so I'd have a video record of it so I can refer back to it in a couple months just to see if it goes up or goes down. Anyway, y'all take care.